Welcome back to the podcast.
In today's episode, we're going to be climbing into the world of elevated experience through the lens of
Beer
wine
and cider
with Alesong Brewing and Blending.
Let's dive into it. What's up, Eugene? You're listening to the Eugene Morning Hustle podcast, brought to you by the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce. We're your hosts, Brandon Miller and Ivan Torres, and like us, we know you'd like to know what's going on in your city, socially, economically, civically, and culturally. From events to guest interviews and professional and personal development tips, each week we bring you stories of local business owners, advocates, leaders, and everyday Eugenians sharing how they've strengthened their roots to reach a little deeper in our community and how you can too. Well, in today's episode, we've got a very exciting treat for you. We've got two of the three founders of Alesong Brewing and Blending with us here today, Doug Coombs and Matt Van Wyk, and we're going to discuss a little bit about their story in Eugene and the beer brewing industry, and talk about what they're doing with elevating the hospitality experience here in our city. So let's dive right into it here. Welcome to the podcast, Doug and Matt.
Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah, we're excited to be here. I just remembered we have beer sitting next to my foot. Do you guys want to have beer during the show?
Bring it out.
Let's do it. Please drink responsibly. Tell us about this beer.
Yeah, so this beer is called Beleza. It's one of our newest cocktail-inspired beers. It's inspired by the Bellini, which is kind of like the mimosa, but instead of orange juice, it's got peach juice in it. And often with bubbles, champagne, sparkling wine added as well. This has Pinot Gris grapes from King Estate Winery and also peaches from the Columbia Gorge area. So you get a really refreshing peach note, some nice grape wine character, and wonderful bubbles. It's a great brunch beer.
Could you take us back to kind of the beginning of Alesong, kind of the whole concept and to where we are now?
Yeah,
I know, it's a strange road.
It has been. I mean, we just celebrated 8 years, so it's, it kind of, some days it feels really long, and sometimes you're like, wow, 8 years went by so fast. And obviously, Brandon spent some time with us, about half of that time with us, but 8 years ago, I guess, or maybe 9, when we started planning this thing, our third business partner, who's not here today, is my brother. He was working with Matt at Oakshire at the time, and I was living in Bogota, Colombia. And he was probably the instigator that sort of dragged us into this thing. But really the idea, was to try to take a beer. We were really excited about breweries, about beer. Oakshire had this, a pretty cool barrel age program, but small as it is at most breweries. Most breweries, especially in the Northwest, make IPA all day long, and maybe play around with a few other things on the fringes. And Oakshire was doing probably more barrel aged beer than a lot of breweries that size, but it was still on the edge compared to some of their other stuff. For us, the idea was, what if we took this thing that's kind of a nights and weekends project and turned it into the focus, and we really made it our bread and butter. And as I mentioned, I was living in Bogota, Colombia at the time, and I was sort of looking for a landing spot to come back to the U.S., and Brian and I had been talking about starting a brewery, I don't know, for as long as we could drink beer, because I don't know, that's what you do when you're a 20-something-year-old guy. You want to work at a brewery, right? But we didn't want to have just another brewery. Obviously, there are so many breweries in the United States and in the Northwest, in Oregon in particular. So we wanted to do something interesting and different, and kind of settled on this niche. And Brian was really the instigator, as I said, kind of dragging Matt into it, dragging me into it, trying to get all of the pieces in place. Anything else that I overlooked, Matt?
Well, it was 10 years ago, actually. It was 2014, and Brian and I were working together, and he was working kind of second shift with our second shift brewer, and basically he would be asked to do the barrel aging projects when the forklift was shut down, when the canning line was shut down, and like Doug alluded to it being a nights and weekends sort of fun project thing. And he's like, this is the best part about my job, is I get to empty barrels, fill barrels, taste from barrels like a winemaker. And, our business is very much set up like a winery. And he's like, let's make this our whole business plan, our whole brewery. And I told him he was crazy. I said, no, that's not good. Until he brought Doug into the fold, and we had some more business sense happening. And, he's got the production and sort of the energy. I had some experience because I've been at this for 23 years. So anyway, it all came together, and we got this thing kicked off and sold our first beer in 2016. So we're 8 years into it now.
And that was at Oakshire where you guys met?
Yeah,
right?
I moved out here in 2009 to Oregon. I lived in the Midwest, and I was brewing in Illinois, Chicagoland area, and moved out here in 2009. And Brian was a senior at the University of Oregon, finishing his chemistry degree. He needed to do an internship somewhere, and he walked into our brewery and got in my face like he does and said, "Do you do internships? I want to work here." And that turned into a job, and then it turned into a new business in Eugene.
What was the first beer? Do you guys still offer it?
At Alesong.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, we might crack into it here soon. Rhino Suit was our first brew we made. This is an imperial milk stout aged in bourbon barrels. Like a winery, we have to get stuff into barrels and just wait, and we have to have patience. And we started with a couple of different beers that we could do 3 or 4 months instead of waiting for a year. Some of our sour beers, it takes a year to 18 months to fully mature and get ready to sell. But we knew we could start out with a beer that was a big, bold, chocolatey, roasty stout with a little bit of bourbon character. And so Rhino Suit was one of our first ones that we released.
And we, for people who are less intimately familiar with beer, a lot of people have probably been into a brewery before. You see the big stainless steel tanks. The basic process for most IPA or typical craft beers is kind of a 3 to 4 week all-in production time from start to finish. And so we go through sort of that part of the process, and then we go down sort of a similar path to a winery where we put it into barrels, we allow it to age and mature, we taste the barrels, blend them together into something else, add fruit in some cases like this one. So it ends up being a much more drawn out process, but definitely creates a more complex beverage and something that also ends up costing more because it is so hands-on.
What is what's the average start to end time for
Probably somewhere between 12 and 18 months. Yeah, and I think most people, and we're located out in wine country, and I think most people would walk in the door not knowing what we are, look around and say this is a winery. We serve in stemware, obviously, because it's better glassware, but also, the vibe, very much feels like a kind of a casual, low-key winery, beautiful patio. You go in the back, it's filled with barrels. Feels like a winery.
I can attest to that.
Yes. You've given many a tour back there.
I have.
Yes.
Well, could you tell us a little bit about just what makes the beer that you make so different? You kind of alluded to the fact that it ages in barrels. It's not quite this 4-week turnaround time kind of thing. What makes it different in the sense of using those barrels? Are they just any old barrels, or what's unique about that?
Well, we look at the barrel as another ingredient in beer. Beer has the water, the malted grains, hops, and yeast. That's the 4 ingredients you need to make a beer. We use a 5th ingredient, and that's barrels. And we have kind of 3 types of beer we make. We make farmhouse ales, saisons, kind of old world sessionable beers. We make our sour fruited beers where we use a lot of different Oregon fruits in them. And then we have our spirits barrel-aged beers. So the first 2 I mentioned, farmhouse ales and sour fruited beers, those use wine barrels to age. And they're typically neutral oak barrels that the winery has used long enough, and they deem them oak neutral, meaning the tannins have kind of been spent. Those barrels are used to house the organisms that make the beer sour and give it kind of some of the earthy and fermentation characters. And the spirits barrels, that's actually to get the spirit flavor. So if we're using a bourbon barrel, we want it to taste like bourbon, the vanilla and caramel and coconut and all those things that come into bourbon. We use tequila barrels, rum barrels, gin barrels, and all that is to get the spirits flavor into the beer. So that's not only do we have to age for a long period of time that makes us different, but that ingredient just gives layers of complexity that other beers maybe don't have because they only have 4 ingredients.
And we use some yeast as well that just takes a really long time to develop, where typically it wouldn't really be viable on kind of a more mass scale where you're trying to get things as fast as possible, because obviously the inventory cost of holding it for a long time doesn't make so much sense.
You guys were the only ones in town that were doing stuff like this, right? Or was there somebody else that inspired this whole idea? Or where did this whole concept of putting beer in barrels kind of come from?
Well, it's a very old thing. Before stainless steel, all beer was aged in wood because you had to have some kind of vessel, and sometimes they served from those wooden casks. So this isn't a new thing. But in the advent of the industrialization, and beer is included in that, everything was made in stainless steel, served in bottles or cans or kegs, and that's the beer world. We kind of rewound that to the old world traditions of putting beer in wood. And, like Doug alluded to, Oakshire had a pretty nice barrel program that they started. In fact, I started it because I was employee number 5, and I brought that from my job that I had in the Midwest. And, everyone has a little pet project in their brewery, but no one is doing it on a large scale. There were some in the Northwest, Cascade up in Portland, who just announced their closure, which is sad. Now we have several people in Bend. There's Ale Apothecary. In Tillamook, we have DeGard. So there's some people that are focusing on it, but if you look nationwide, you could count them on, 2 hands, 3 hands maybe.
What kind of response have you seen in the community when you kind of got things going and kind of introducing this kind of a new concept for most of the community? What were you seeing?
Well, one of the things that's cool about it is we're kind of this, because it's such a niche specialty product. There's was a cool response from the beer nerds, people who are super into beer, and we've gotten that response sort of on a global basis. We've won a lot of awards for our beer, and so there are people, in Asia who drink our beer and think it's awesome, or in Europe, and that's really cool. But within Eugene, which is really our core market, right? If you're talking about people who are living and breathing beer all the time, there just aren't that many of them in a town the size of Eugene, and so that can't be our core customer. And what we really wanted to do is kind of introduce people to a type of beer that maybe they weren't used to. That I think a lot of people who really like to have a nicer, food, drink experience could appreciate something where it's about having quality over quantity. This is not necessarily the beer that you're going to have a few of before you go into the football game. This is something, that you could bring over for Thanksgiving dinner. You can bring a bottle and have it be something a little more complex, goes really well with food. And so that was a little bit slower introduction with the local customers. And I think part of it has been our wine country location. We get people out there who are more open-minded by the time they've driven a half hour, or they're just out there and they're like, sure, we'll try what you do. We're here. And Brandon was the face of Alesong out there for the first 4 years of the tasting room. And so he introduced a lot of people, and maybe you can speak to how some of those first reactions went. They were varied, but people have come around, I think.
I can definitely speak to that. I had to answer to that quite often, but I would say, the main thing was the fact that there was skepticism in the sense that this isn't beer. And that's not quite the right answer.
It's not Coors Light.
It's not Coors Light. Yes, and you just mentioned that too. That the fact that there's a time and a place for every beer. Yes, sure. Coors Light rafting down the river. Yeah, that's great. What a great combination.
Yeah,
probably not
sure.
Probably not going to take a bottle that weighs 15 pounds with you. That also is probably 15% or something. You're probably not going to take that. But when people would come in, absolutely, people would be a little skeptical, and I think the idea is kind of almost forgetting your own perceptions and ideas about what beer is, or about what beverages are in general. Because some people would say, wow, this kind of tastes like cider. This kind of tastes like wine. It's like, yes, all those answers are roughly right. But I think the main thing is that, get rid of your beliefs that you have about this beverage and just taste the flavors. And if the flavors start to reveal things that you may not have experienced before, or that you've had in other ways, that's the experience. So could you talk a little bit more about the kind of that aspect of it, kind of the hospitality and elevated experience out at the country brewery and this product?
Well, our mission at Alesong is to elevate the way people experience and understand beer. And just like you were saying, you have a thought in your head of what beer is. And so you saw this all the time. When people came in, they would say, I don't like beer, because they're thinking, I don't like light lagers. I don't like IPAs. Everyone keeps trying to give me a bitter beer and I don't like it. That to them is beer, and ours was a different concept. And so the same thing comes kind of with our hospitality too. I would say, now that we have a restaurant going, now that we have a lot of crowds coming out, it's no different than any other restaurant. We're trying to give a good experience, the same thing you'd like to get at any restaurant that's, in the city limits, but we're doing it from a focus of beer and a different type of beer, different kind of beverage actually, and now cider and wine, because we make both of those as well. But we want to tie that in and make sure that people understand that these beverages actually pair just as well, if not better. I will tell you, I'm biased, but definitely better with food than, say, wine does. Everyone says wine should go with cheese. Beer is better with cheese. Beer is better with a lot of different foods. And so we just kind of promote that.
Why is that?
Well, part of it is when you get fatty flavors, cheese has a lot of that, but also other foods do that you go to a restaurant and get. But carbonation is one. You can get bubbles in a wine. We've also got more ingredients. We just talked about our 5 ingredients we use to make Alesong beer. We've got more flavor hooks. When you think about the roastiness of a stout, or you think about the fruitiness of an IPA, or the tartness, the acidity from our sour beers cuts through, a rich steak or some fatty brie or something like that. So, we train our staff to understand beer flavors, and we try to lead people through their choices based on what they're eating there. So we have a lot of that's different than just a tap room where you go pull an IPA and grab a burger from the cart that's out in the parking lot.
Yeah, and I think a big part of what we've been trying to do from the beginning is convince people that, like you said, there is a moment for every beer, but also that there are some moments where you want something that's a little more elevated. And I think the default in my experience and in the US tends to be, oh yeah, grab a bottle of wine. You're going to a nicer dinner, or you want to have something that's a little bit more elevated, grab some wine. And so what we've been trying to do is show people that it doesn't have to be wine in that moment. It can be beer, and you can have an awesome experience. You can have something where you're enjoying it and savoring and thinking about the complexities of the pairing with the food, and really kind of having something that is a little bit higher end, and show people that there is a beer for that moment, as well as there's kind of a moment for every beer.
There was something I was just thinking about, and how you go out to a beautiful winery and you buy a bottle, and it tastes amazing out there, right? You're out looking at everything, and you're like, man, this is like a postcard. It's amazing. You go home, you open that bottle a few weeks later, or later that night, whatever your thing is, and it's just not the same. You're kind of felt I thought it tasted better out there. I don't know what happened. I think one of the things that I have experienced personally with this product is that it does taste just as good out in the country as it does as taking it to Thanksgiving, or having a moment that means something in some way. It still tastes just as great, which I think is pretty unique.
Yeah, I've had that experience lots of times at wineries and even breweries. Is experiences are important to everyone's life, and we try to build that out at our tasting room. We have a beautiful view. We have 5-acre property that you can enjoy yourself. So obviously everything's going to be better. The day is going to be brighter. You forgot about all the troubles of the world, and so everything that you eat and drink tastes great. We hope that when you get home with that bottle, that same experience is, you can share that on your back patio as well. And hopefully our beer can sort of do that without putting on just the flowery language of I don't want to say wineries, but sometimes they get a little bit, the marketing overshadows the product. And we hope that our product overshadows any halfway marketing we do. No offense to my marketing partner beside me.
Your operation seems very strategic. What are some of the challenges that you guys have ran into? I mean, from designing the menu for your restaurant, from when you guys first started up, can you share something about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody who's had a small business could probably list off 10 challenges since this morning. But we've had quite a few. I think we talked about one of the biggest ones, which is sort of introducing people to a concept that is not super common, and trying to explain to people, what it is and how it should fit. And the easiest way to do that, obviously, is to try it. But, on a store shelf, you can't explain it to somebody. So that's been a big one. We have, experimented with lots of different kind of, models out at the tasting room. Some of them sort of forced upon us, like by COVID, for example, where we suddenly learned how to do table service in a 24-hour period. We're like, cool, let's do this. We have a pretty big beer club, which kind of functions like a wine club. But at one point also during COVID, when we were feeling like we were getting too crowded out there, we switched to a members only model, which I would say was not well received in the community. We backpedaled on that. And I think that's kind of how business goes. You try something and, the intention is always to put your best foot forward as a business and do something that people are going to be stoked about, but it doesn't always work out that way. So that was one that was particularly interesting.
Sorry, Zach.
Zach didn't care for telling people they had to go away. Yeah.
No, I trust me, I remember all those details. Speaking of all of those specific challenges, what challenges have you found most recent with? You guys have come out with cider and wine and now have a restaurant. That seems like a lot of new offerings. Do you feel like that is kind of still on brand for what Alesong Brewing and Blending is doing? Or is this something where it's like, well, we're trying to explore other options to be relevant in the community, relevant in the beverage scene? Like what's the... What was the move for that? Like, why do that?
I think there's a lot of reasons we chose to make cider and wine. One is we all three, the three partners, like cider and wine, and we know how to make it. And we always, as you know, had that as an offering, a guest cider, a guest white wine, a guest red wine, a guest IPA, a guest Pilsner. For those people who were like, that's what I drink, I didn't come out here to drink your stuff. And as hard as we tried to convince them that this is what we should do, everyone has their own flavors. And so we were always offering those things. We just decided maybe we should make them. And Brian has a lot of experience in the winemaking because he did that a little bit before we started Alesong. But as you know, people come up to our tasting room and they don't know if we're a brewery or a winery or a cidery or whatever. So there's some confusion there. Now we have it for them. And there's a lot of people who, when they say, I don't like beer, we can convince them. But now, even if you're not good at convincing someone, you can say, oh, but you do like cider. Oh, you do like white wine and red wine. And we've always, it's about the experience that we're providing at our tasting room. And we can do that with wine. Now, it's still pretty new, and I think we're still trying to decide whether our customers have accepted the fact that we are a winery as well and a cidery as well.
Well, I think, we were talking a little bit about the changes in the beer industry, and I think, over time, the industry has evolved pretty significantly, and I think it's becoming more and more local. And I think, it's always been a goal of ours to be, a big, have a good following within the community, have our own community that, really supports us here locally. And I think adding cider and wine just sort of builds on being a place within the community, right? It's an experience you can come have, and there's something for everybody, right? It becomes more inclusive than it was before, and really kind of leaning into that local vibe, because I think the future of beer, as it gets more and more crowded, is not more aisles at the grocery store of beer, because none of us needs more options at the grocery store for IPAs, right? So I think over time it's just going to be, okay, which of the 10 or 20 local brewery, winery, bar, you name it, experiences do I feel like really kind of fits for me? And I think we have realized that, like, that's kind of our focus at this point, is how can we be a really cool place and experience for people to come be part of it. And adding the wine and cider is just like includes more people.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. It adds value for sure. Has it been challenging to add those elements in?
Yes.
Yes. Everything is challenging. Just trying to get people's attention when we're trying to let people know what we have, whether it's through our newsletter or our social media. All those things are hard because we as humans have so much taking our attention. So just to tell them, on site from our staff, I don't think it's that hard. We just train them on what we have that they can offer. But it's challenging.
Production-wise, I mean, it's not nothing. I mean, we continue to add projects. That's certainly is challenging. And, I think we had a tasting room in the Fifth Street Market for 3 years. And when that lease came up last fall, we ended up not renewing it. And the main reason behind that is we just have too many projects. It seems like every year it's like, let's add one more thing. Like, this is the cool initiative for this year. This is the initiative for next year. And then eventually you're like, man, we have a lot of initiatives and not so many more hours to do those initiatives. And so kind of looking at the list and saying, okay, what are we most excited about? What are we least excited about? I was like, well, we are more excited about having wine and really leaning into kind of our core experience out in the country.
So was the bottle design from the beginning? Like, you knew you wanted to have them in these kind of bottles for the beer and to meet the experience, or is that something you guys learned over time?
We started with bottles from the start. The cooler doors are full of cans right now. But when we started this project, planning it in 2014, 2015, there weren't as many cans out there. The cans have taken over the beer world. That being said, when you open a cork out of a bottle of wine, there's a little bit of an experience there where you pop it and pour it just like I did these 4 glasses of wine here. Although it wasn't a cork, it was a cap. But regardless, there's a presentation to that. And that type of experience is what we wanted to build at Alesong. If you pop a can of rosé, it just doesn't quite have the same sort of panache.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think when you pop a cork, people around you always make this noise. Oh, right?
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
Right? When you pop a cork, right? But a can, everybody's tone deaf to that.
If we walked up to a table and when we were doing table service and just popped cans of rosé and poured them into your glass, you'd be like, oh, thanks. I'm at a brewery.
Yeah, I mean, and we've been talking kind of this whole podcast about how focused we are on the experience and like getting people to experience beer in a different way. And part of that is the packaging. Part of it's the glassware, how you present it to people. So yeah, definitely having it feel like, it's a product that we put, sometimes a couple of years of work into. And so sometimes there's just an element of like wanting people to know that they should not expect this to be just like every other beer that they've had off the shelf.
And Ivan, your question makes me realize that maybe we should just not call it beer, because you said I haven't seen it in this presentation before. Like, it's not normally what you see in beer, and so maybe we need a new name.
Good luck coming up with
when
that.
I'm doing tastings at the grocery store around town, someone will come up like, "What do you have over here?" I said, "Oh, have you had Alesong before?" I don't say, "Have you had Alesong beer?" Or I say, "Would you like to try an Alesong?" Because I think saying, "Would you like to try a beer?" turns off 50+% of people who didn't want to have beer that day, but they might want an Alesong.
There you go. You're trying to create a Kleenex vibe for Alesong.
That's right.
Defining the category.
It's like when people go to the bar and they just see a Boneyard tap handle, they're like, I'll have the Boneyard. And
Yep.
It's like, well, which one? Nobody says which one. It's just,
There's only one.
there's only one.
Yeah. When I moved here in 2009, Ninkasi was on that vibe. They were 3 years old at the time, and people said, "I'll have the Ninkasi." And you're like, well, which one would you like? But it was just the brand was there.
So we have a rosé here, right? So this is some of the wine that you guys are making?
Yeah, we've put out 3 wines so far. We started with a semi-sparkling Pinot Gris that was barrel-aged, because that's what we do. Most Pinot Gris are not barrel-aged, but we spent some time in oak with ours. We released a Pinot Noir, and then this is rosé, if you want to talk about the grapes and the winery we work with.
Yeah, I mean, so we've used all, we don't grow grapes. We don't have a vineyard on the property. As many wineries don't grow their own grapes, but we decided at first, because what we do almost with everything is try to source as much as close to home as possible. And so sort of the obvious choice would be like, well, let's go next door and grab stuff from King Estate. But then we're like, okay, are we just trying to make wine that tastes like King Estate wine when we are right next door to them? Like, what value are we adding here? And so we ended up going to work with a friend of ours up in the north end of the valley in the Dundee Hills AVA, which makes some of the best wine in Oregon. And we've been working with Durant Vineyards up there to help us source grapes and help with some of the initial processing of them. But wanting to, if we're going to make wine in this wine region, we felt like it should be different than the wine that everybody else is making in this wine region. Might as well have it be additive, not just like trying to slot in a substitute for something. So all of our stuff so far has been Dundee fruit, but we're pretty new on this, so I don't want to say that we're always going to be making Dundee fruit wine.
So speaking of that, working with local Oregon grown products, are you using other local companies for some of the ingredients that you guys have, the grains, the hops, any sort of fruit and things like that?
Yep, we have from day one used a lot of Northwest grown things, many Oregon grown things. We don't put a premium on it that we have to use. Some breweries do, where they're like, we only use locally grown things for our restaurant and for our brewery. We didn't make that a stipulation for our brewery, but we try as hard as we can. We want to have the highest quality ingredients first, and if we can support local businesses, we do. In particular, we started using more and more grains from Camas Country Mill. We have a couple beers. In fact, we made your wedding beer with Camas Country Mill grain.
I do recall.
Yes, and that was delicious. And that partnership has helped us to realize they have some great things that we can use in our beer. So we make a lot of farmhouse ales that use grain grown in Junction City area. And it's delicious. And then we use hops from the Northwest because obviously Oregon's the second highest producing hop growing region in the country. We use a lot of fruit from Oregon. We're so lucky to have that kind of.
It's incredible how much access we have here. That just to
cherries,
get real
peaches,
whole fruit, and most breweries that are making fruit beer use puree and other processed things. We always try to use whole organic fruit if we can, and we have access to it locally, so it's actually fresh and delicious.
Yep. And then with this new restaurant thing, it's been awesome because we've been able to use Long's Meat Market. We use Bread Stop, I believe, for our...
Yeah, Bread Stop makes the buns. We work with Groundworks Organics, Little Wings Farm. We try to work with as many of the local businesses as we can, in large part because we prefer to work with local entrepreneurs, keep the money in the community, but also because the product's better. If it doesn't have to get shipped to a warehouse somewhere and repacked and then brought to another warehouse, I don't know. I don't see any reason why not to, unless like your only driver is cost, which has never been the case for us. Maybe it should be. We'd make more money, but it's not.
But it seems like it adds to the story of the product as well, right? And kind of the connection where it's like, it almost like as a consumer makes you feel like I'm with you on this, like oh wow, they're a part of us.
Yeah, and I think, we talk about the community aspect. We've been talking about it from the consumer standpoint, right? Yeah. We want to be in the community on that side, but I think it's a big deal to be in the community on the other side too, right? We're all part of this community here, and how can we support each other and use each other's products, and even just, partnering with other organizations, for events and things like that is an awesome way to be part of it.
And we also know that many of our customers are shopping at the Saturday market, and they're using those same farms to grab their own produce. And so why would we expect them to come out to our place and try the Cisco frozen patty or the, something like that? Because we know how a lot of Eugenians shop or eat and cook. And so we're trying to do that too by using local producers.
So speaking about that in your restaurant, how has that venture been? And I'm curious about your guys' menu. How do you pick what you're gonna offer? Is this related to your drinks to make sure that they match up?
Yeah, so there's a lot of questions there, and I'm only starting because if you ask Doug how it's gone, he's had to work the hardest on this as he kind of oversees the tasting room. But employees are tough. If someone calls off, we have to fill in for them. So Doug spent a lot of time out there running food to the tables, and I know he loves it. But we hired our chef. His name is Brendan, and he came from King Estate. He had worked there for about a couple of years, 18 months to 2 years. Came to us from, prior to that, Denver. He was working in high-end restaurants there. And we, along with him, sort of planned out the menu based on some of his sort of background and experience and some of the farmers he was already working with by being a King Estates chef. And, I wouldn't say we're farm to table, but I guess you could describe it that way, is we use a lot of local farms for our things, and we are seasonal menu, rotating. We have a great burger. We rotate, kind of the toppings that we put on it now and again. We often have a chicken sandwich. I don't think that's on there right now, but we have a couple sandwiches, a couple share plates, a couple salads. We have plenty of vegetarian options for people who are vegetarian. We have a dessert usually on the menu. So,
yeah, and I think it's always hard to describe what you are without using all of the sort of tired buzzwords and cliches. But I think we try to be recognizable things. We have a burger, but we try to do a really good version of whatever it is, and we're not trying to be overly expensive, but we use good ingredients. So we're also not the cheapest place in town, but it's definitely like, if we're going to have a burger, we're going to use the best ingredients we can in this burger. And so it's going to be a really good burger, not necessarily because it's got, a bunch of weird toppings on it, but because we used, really good beef, and we put it on a really good bun, and we used really good organic produce to top it with. It's not necessarily that it is overdone or super weird. Just like our beers, we try to use the best ingredients we can, and that's kind of shines through.
And you asked about pairing them with the food. We don't really make the menu we don't design a dish around the beer, but we do give suggestions on our menu. Like, this dish will go great with this thing that's on. Our beer lineup changes a lot, and so it's hard for us to keep reprinting those menus. But as much as we can, we try to give you should try this beer with the burger. Try this beer with this salad.
And I think, the types of beers we make, there is such a kind of wide variety of flavors. From that first beer we had that had some acidity to it, had some fruit. You could put that, like Matt was saying, with a, fatty cheese or something, or anything that you want to cut with a little bit of acid would be really good, or like a cheesecake with that like peach essence would be awesome from the beer. And then, to this other beer that you have in front of you that we haven't tasted yet, which is basically dessert by itself, finding something different that's going to fit with that, big and bold, that would stand up to the flavors and the higher alcohol. I think we have such a variety of beer styles and flavors that I think we can always find something to recommend with it, which is pretty fun.
So speaking of food pairings, right? When I was there, we were doing some guided tastings. Is that something that's still happening? And could you explain what that is and how that works?
Right. When we, we've mentioned it a couple times as we've been chatting about the experience we're trying to give the guests when they come in. And one thing we did, and we're not doing it anymore, but it was great. When things were a little slower with COVID and we had a little less traffic, we had a farmhouse table that people could sign up to take a guided tasting. And it was essentially, think of a winery who walks you through a set of wines. Well, we would do that with beer, and we would pair small bites with them. And you could do it with just the beer, but you could do it with the food pairings as well. And Brandon was a master of it and had to do a lot of work in preparing the food, presenting the food, and giving people the same things that Doug was just talking about, all those food hooks, the food pairings, this beer goes with this food, in an intimate setting around a table, the way you might share a meal with someone. And that was very successful. People had a great experience, but it became a little bit hard to continue to carry out, just because you had to take reservations, you had to make sure the food was there and prepped and ready. I still want to go back to that with now that we have kitchen opportunities. We're still talking about whether that's feasible.
But I think food pairings has always been something that we're focused on, and it's something that we continue to do with each of our club releases. So when we release beer, we release 4 or 5 new beers once a quarter to our club members, and we always host a big party where we have created a small bite that goes with each beer, because we're trying to show people, as we've been talking about, we're trying to show people how well beer and food pairs together. It doesn't just have to be a wine pairing that you think of all the time. And so for this last release, we went through, we had a stout that was paired with a kind of a chocolate cracker with Cambozola cheese on it, which was just kind of like, people were like, whoa, you're pairing chocolate and this kind of like creamy, funky cheese. And I was not so sure, but it was awesome. people were like stoked on that. What were some of the other?
Well, we've done tacos with our tequila margarita inspired beer. We've had local chocolatier Davey Wendt make chocolates that pair nicely with our things.
But it's definitely something that we have focused on, and really I think the main showcase for it now is club releases for us, and that's always super fun. I think just this week we were talking about what are the pairings going to be for our next beers.
How do you find the food pairings?
Well, practice. You taste, you put the food in your mouth and you put the beer in your mouth. There's several books out there written about food and beer pairings. The same way with wine. You can just Google it as well and find flavor matches. And there's a lot of science that goes into it when you look at your palate and what it's perceiving, and the sweet, sour, salty, bitter, all those flavors. And so for me, I alluded to it earlier, I've been in the industry for 23 years, and it's a little bit of a passion of mine to eat and also pair beer with food. And so you do practice, you learn about it, you read a book about it, you look at how some of these foods pair with beers. And so then you just get good at knowing that this will probably be good with that, but you have to try it first. Sometimes when we do a beer dinner, we'll host those quarterly or so. We'll work with a chef, now our own chef, to make a dinner, and we'll pencil out the beers that are going to go with the certain dishes, not to overpower them, to complement or contrast the flavors. And then we have to try them. We have to do a little test run to see if it works, because sometimes all it needs is a little more salt. Or sometimes it needs a little more, the vinaigrette needs a little more acid or something like that. And then you just find this pleasing complement that goes together.
But there's some sort of basic rules that you can go by, right? I mean, if you want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, the basics are you match intensities. And so you don't put a big barrel-aged stout with your light fish dish. Instead, you put that with a big beef dish. You want to put like your lighter beers and wines with a salad or with that fish course. If you have something that's got a roast character or char from a grill, you might want to use a brown ale or a stout, something like that. Sometimes sweetness can affect something. So if you have a big sweet beer, it may not go well with a sweet dessert. Sometimes if you have a fruity sort of beer, it might go great with a brownie or a cheesecake, because it's like the fruit sauce that you put on top of it. So just thinking through how that beer flavor and impact goes with the food. Yeah.
So speaking of pairing food and beer and that sort of thing, and just beverages in general, right? There is this movement of this zero proof kind of movement, right? Where it's about non-alcoholic products and things like that. Can people still get an experience like that through something that is non-alcoholic like that? And speaking of that, what are you guys seeing in your business in the beverage world about non-alcoholic products? Is that something Alesong's looking to do as well? I know you got wine and cider and beer. Is that another arm you want to explore? And how is all of that kind of shaking up for you?
Well, I'll just start by saying that I was in Market of Choice the other day, and there was a whole door full of NA beers, not just beverages, just beers. The whole door was full of NA. And then also Athletic Brewing Company, one of the biggest non-alcoholic producers in the country, is now the 10th biggest craft brewery in the country of 10,000.
By the way, I remember when we were at the Great American Beer Fest and we saw their booth set up, and we're just like, wow, non-alcoholic beer?
Weird. Yeah, why are they here?
Yeah,
Weird.
they're only like 5 years old. And they're already
it's wild.
So that is, you said the NA movement. You're right. It's not just a movement. It's here to stay and for real. You can get non-alcoholic Black Butte Porter. You can get non-alcoholic Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. So it's real. I'll just say this from a production side, and then maybe you can talk about our tasting room in general. It's a challenge because there's some specialized equipment you need to make NA beer. It's not just you can't just say, oh, let's get the recipe out here and just kick together an NA beer. It doesn't work that way. There's 3 or 4 different ways you can make it, and just like there never used to be a canning line for small breweries. That's why there was no cans for craft breweries. Now there is. They make them. They also make, I won't get into it too deep. We don't have time, but some of the technology that you can do to make non-alcoholic beers. And I will say that a lot of non-alcoholic beers in the past were not good. They tasted awful. And there's still some work to be done, but now they're figuring out how to make them taste great. And so it's really it's not just a small thing. It's here to stay, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know that it's something that's going to fit with our production probably, but typically at any given time we will have a mocktail on the menu. We'll have kombucha, root beer, sparkling water. I think we do actually have an non-alcoholic beer, guest beer on the menu now as well. I think from our perspective and trying to keep things that sort of fit with who we are and what we do, I think we've done a couple of lower alcohol farmhouse ales, and I think we may continue to experiment with that. Maybe like a 4% grisette kind of table beer, saison style beer that would be good for people that are like, I'm trying to consume less alcohol, not necessarily the people who don't consume any alcohol. But we'll see. Time will tell. It's certainly, like Matt said, it is. I think that's here to stay. I don't think that's a fad.
Right. Yeah. And I think, yes, it is definitely something that's here to stay, especially when you have the Athletics like the 10th largest brewery. But, when we're talking about enjoying people's company, no matter what the beverage is in front of them, that's kind of the important part, right? So it is about enjoying the experience together. And, like you said, having a lower alcohol beer, right? Like a grisette farmhouse style ale or something like that. That's something where somebody doesn't feel like they're pressured to drink something that's higher alcohol or whatever. They can just have something that's like, less alcohol, still enjoy the experience and enjoy the flavors, right? Which is kind of one of the big things too.
Yep. And because we're a half hour outside of Eugene, we're always going to have an NA option for people. We want people to get back home safely wherever their home is. And so we have to have that, and we will. And also make people feel comfortable hanging out with their group and not having to have a glass of wine in front of them.
What are some of the significant milestones that you guys have hit?
We made it 8 years. We don't make beers to win awards, but we are the most award-winning brewery in Eugene, and not Oregon, but we're right up there. In our short 8 years, we've won like 11 Great American Beer Festival awards. We just won our first World Beer Cup. We won a gold at the 2024 World Beer Cup, and a lot of Oregon Beer Awards and things like that. So we're pretty proud of our awards. It often is judged by our peers, and there's people who do what we do saying, that's really good stuff, and that makes us feel good about what we've started.
Yeah, I mean, that's big, and that's been super helpful as we talk about how we do have fans kind of all over the world. I mean, that's part of it is we've been pretty well received critically in some of these major competitions, but in terms of other milestones, I think the first big one was getting our tasting room open, which Brandon helped with a lot.
Blood, sweat, and tears, baby.
Yeah, exactly. we had, I think you, me, and Greg down there putting in the fence.
Oh, I remember that.
One day.
It was a hot day.
It was a hot day. Like most small businesses, there's a lot of, you just do it because it needs to be done.
I'm going to interrupt you there just to say that, some of the hard things that happen as a small business owner is that you got to do the work. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, each one of you guys put in that freaking equity.
And still do.
And still do.
But, I think it's really easy sometimes to just be so focused on the work that you have to do today and tomorrow and next week or whatever that you don't step back and see the milestones. But, we did celebrate 8 years just recently. And, I think We've won over 60 medals. We now have a restaurant. We have, a pretty good sized, beer club. We haven't killed each other. I mean, all three of us. I think it's a pretty cool accomplishment actually that, 8 years in, the three of us who started it are all still here, and we all still mostly like each other. I think that's a pretty big accomplishment.
Could you speak to three business owners, right? That's a lot of personalities. That's a lot of different skill sets. That's a lot of what could be drama. So What do you all bring to the operation that makes it work after 8 years?
We bring a lot of craziness. That's what we bring. No, it is important that everyone has a skill set they bring to the table. If two people are best at the same thing, often you can butt heads, or if you've got too many alpha personalities. Doug and I joke we're both middle children in our families. Both of our families, Doug and Brian's and mine, comes from a family of 4 boys, and Doug and I fit in the middle, so we feel like we're compromisers, and that makes things a lot easier. We're like, oh, whatever you want to do. But no, the great thing about to your question, I come from many years of making beer, and so I kind of had some production experience as well as some, I don't know if notoriety is the right word, but people knew me in the industry. Brian came from a wine situation and worked at Oakshire, and so he had a lot of production skills and a chemistry background. So he brought a lot of the science to our business. And Doug has worked in the finance world, worked in the wine world, has owned his own business, so he brings a lot of those skills to the table in our direct-to-consumer business. So we all have a little bit of strengths that we stay in our lanes, we respect each other, and it's really just worked out. And I've watched businesses fall apart from a personal standpoint, and I've watched relationships, not only just friend relationships, but marriage relationships fall apart, who are owners of breweries, owners of businesses, because it's really hard work and it's really challenging, and sometimes you don't like each other, but if you have a respect for each other, that's what's helped our business.
But I think finding ways where you can do fun things together, and the beer industry is a fun industry, right? None of us got into beer to get rich, because let's be honest, nobody in beer is getting rich. Certainly not at this point. Maybe 7 or 8 years ago when breweries were getting bought. But none of us makes, a salary that would compare with what you would get in the, a normal like private sector job. But there are so many opportunities to do fun things and have fun experiences. And I think making sure that we find moments where we can do those fun things together, I think keeps everybody kind of engaged and reminds you that, hey, we do actually like each other, even if we disagree about, this particular blend that we're trying to decide what it should be like. So
I get to travel to Lithuania this fall for a beer fest. I wasn't really sure where Lithuania was, and I'm going there, and that's the type of fun things we get to do. And we've done beer fests in Norway and the United Kingdom, and all over the country, and that makes it fun.
All right, well, let's talk about this dark beer here.
Yeah, we're drinking Rhino Suit, and as I alluded to, is the actual first beer we put into barrels, into Heaven Hill bourbon barrels. And this is Imperial Milk Stout. Milk stouts are made with lactose. Lactose is a molecule, it's milk sugar, and it's a molecule that's too large for yeast to actually consume. And so it stays behind in the beer, leaving a creamy smoothness to it. So you get chocolate notes, roasty notes, and then we've got overlain with this bourbon character that's like caramely and vanilla and toffee. So it's like Doug said, it's a dessert in a glass.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room. Oh, I'm sorry, the rhino in the room. Rhino Suit, what a name. Tell us about how that name even came about.
Yeah, this is a pretty random name, I suppose you could say, and one that gets mispronounced in our tasting room constantly. But this was... we had a meeting with one of our investors, and this was early on, and we were trying to convince him to invest in our company. He's a very famous, very successful winemaker that I had worked with in my past life when I was working in Sonoma in the wine industry. And he's someone who obviously has a lot of experience and has been very successful, but he's one of these people who also really feels good sharing that experience, sharing his advice with you. And so as part of our pitch to him about why he should invest in Alesong, he wanted to give us some advice about running a business. And I'll cut some of the expletives, but he's a pretty big animated guy. And so we're sitting in his office, and he's kind of behind his desk, and the three of us are on a couch on the other side of the desk, and he's kind of talking to us and getting riled up as he goes. But he's like, you know what business is all about? Are you sure you're really ready to be in business? And when you're trying to start a business, this is not kind of the pep talk you want. But he's like, business is really just about people putting walls in front of you. All day long, people are going to put walls in front of you. And you're like, man, like, I'm trying to get some inspiration here. This is not so inspirational. It sounds really hard. And, spoiler alert, it is really hard. So he was right. But he's like, you know what I do? Every time somebody puts a wall in front of me and I'm just like, man, I'm never going to get through this wall. I go back in my office and I put on my rhino suit. Sorry, you can cut that. I put on my rhino suit and I come back out. He's like, you know what a rhino looks like, right? And we're like, yeah. He's like, big, like huge shoulders, big effing horn. Rhino could run over anything. I go in my office, put on my rhino suit, and at this point he's like standing up and like kind of towering over us, and we're all sinking down a little bit. We're like, wow, this got really intense. And he's like, put on my rhino suit, and I just charge through that wall. Are you guys ready to charge through those walls? And we're like, uh-huh. And he's like, cool, I'll invest. And we're like,
yeah. The best part of the story was he said yes, and he's an investor of ours. And then we had a beer name because we all left there and drove back, or we were driving back home and said, we got to use that for a beer name.
Yeah,
and Rhino Suit was born.
And it was the first beer we made when we first got our TTB license from the federal government. We made this stout, and that was sort of felt like our first major wall that we had to break through. And so it was it was like very fitting. We're like, that's got to be Rhino Suit. And as it turns out, it's been a very popular beer. And so we have made it every year since we started, and it is somewhat of a flagship for us.
Yep. And then variants like vanilla Rhino Suit with vanilla beans, and raspberry Rhino, and coconut Rhino, and senior Rhino, the Mexican chocolate version. So Rhino has lived on through our 8 years.
And that is simply one of the best backstories of any beer name ever.
Absolutely. And it's delicious.
Thank you. I'm glad you like it.
I did have a real quick question before we jump into this next segment. When did you choose to go worldwide, and how did you do that?
Well, that's a really great question. So,
as our global director of sales here, Matt can step in.
I take care of all sales outside of our tasting room now, and so I'm the global sales director. I think that when you look at this beer that retails in our tasting room for $19 for a 500 milliliter bottle, and around town you can find it for $17 to $22 depending on where you're shopping. And the flavors that we've been talking about, it's different. I think listeners are going to realize it's different, right? And so it's for some people, and we wish the world would drink Alesong beers, but it's not for everyone. And so we knew we had to spread it a little farther afield. And so we started on the West Coast. We sell beer in Washington and California as well as Oregon. We just started in Idaho and Nevada, but we are also in Arizona and Colorado. So we're on most of the West Coast. We sell a little bit in Virginia, and that's just the United States. And then we sell in Korea, Japan, China. We sold some in Norway, some in the UK, some in the continental Europe. And when I say that, most all of our beer, probably 90 to 95% is all sold in the state of Oregon. This little bit in all these different places is a pallet here, a pallet there, a case to this store, a case to that store. So it's not very much, but the world should love this beer, and so we're taking it to the world. And like I said, this fest in Lithuania invited me, and September 21st, I'll be pouring Eugene's Alesong Brewing beer in Lithuania.
And so when you say, the question was, how did we go worldwide? Yeah. And I think in many cases it's just being opportunistic. And I think we have built a reputation, and unfortunately Brian's not here. He should be getting a lot of the credit for the production of the beer, although we all participate to some degree. But when you win sort of as many awards as we've won, and there are some sort of consumer crowdsourced rating sites that people rate beers, and we have very high scores on all of those sites. And so typically we have 2-3 inbound requests a year where people are like, hey, I'm so-and-so from Thailand, and I'm interested in carrying your beer, because probably they saw that we won an award, or they found it on one of these rating sites, and they're like, wow, this is one of the best breweries in the United States. And so we get inbound interest for those things, and you have to sift through and make sure it's legit. But Matt does a good job of kind of getting those out to the right people and spreading things around. So,
And the beauty of our beer, it's got a great shelf life, so we're not worried. If we were making IPAs, there's no chance we would ever sell that far afield because our beer will get old and it will go stale. But our beer, because of the high alcohol content or the acidity of it, it means you could have a beer a year after we made it, or 2 years, still tasting just perfect. And sometimes it gets even better as it ages, just like a fine wine. So we're not afraid to send it to another country. Because there are customers out there who are seeking it out. So we do that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can attest to having people from all over the world come into the tasting room and say, I had your beer in Australia. And I'm like, I don't know how you did that. We haven't sold it there yet.
Yeah, right.
That's great.
yeah, somebody flew with it. And
Yeah,
showed
people
up.
tried
Try
it, right?
this.
But people want to come see, the mecca, the location, the thing. It's pretty
Yeah,
wild.
makes you feel good.
Alrighty, everybody. So we're to that part of the show where we get to know our guests a little bit better. Are you guys ready?
Ready?
Oh, we're ready.
All right. When you're not at work, what do you like to do? How do you spend your time?
I like to wakeboard in the summertime and snowboard in the winter.
I try to camp as much as I can and get out into the forest.
Any locations that you just keep going back to that you just really love to go to?
I tell you, well, you can say where you wakeboard at because that's close to the brewery.
I mostly wakeboard at Fern Ridge, which I think is great for its proximity, if not its water clarity.
I love anything around Oak Ridge to go either hiking or camping, but I am in the process of purchasing a cabin up Mackenzie River, and so I may be going up river a little bit to stay in my cabin if I can get this done. Yeah.
What was the first career you dreamed of, unless it was brewing beer as a kid?
For me, it was not brewing beer. This was a later in life realization. I was a pre-med student when I went to college first. I was going to be a doctor, but more specifically, I grew up in the age of Michael Jordan, and I thought maybe I like kids, and so maybe I'll be a pediatrician or I'll be a team doctor for an NBA team. And if I could sit on the bench for every Chicago Bulls game while Michael Jordan was playing, that was my goal.
Yeah, I was probably more delusional, but I thought I was going to be Michael Jordan.
That's a good one.
What is one thing that surprises people about you?
Well, I'll go first. Like Brandon, I'm from the Midwest, and I have a lot of Midwest nice. So I think sometimes people, after getting to know me, go, dang, he's just a nice guy. Almost too nice sometimes.
I lived in Bogota, Colombia for 4 years.
What took you down there?
My first midlife crisis.
In his 20s.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What brought you here?
So had some family living here, kept visiting them and saying, oh my goodness gracious, this is not Iowa, this is not Illinois, this is Oregon, and loving the ocean, the coast, the mountains, and decided Northwest and the beer scene here was where I needed to get a beer job, and that brought us here.
Made it happen.
Yep.
Okay, now, we talked about this earlier, about food pairings, but what is one of the most unusual beer and food pairings that you would recommend to our audience to try? To open their mind, expand their perception of food and beer being paired. That would blow their mind.
I wish I was ready for that because I know this is quick hit, quick fire, and I'm supposed to think of something, but I know there's something good that you'd say, whoa, that's so weird.
I know. I feel like we just did one at the last release that everybody was surprised by.
Well, I mean, you having like a dessert beer, the stout with this Cambozola is a kind of a creamy blue cheese. It's a blend between Gorgonzola and Camembert, so it's kind of like brie and blue cheese had a baby. So putting those on a sort of a slightly sweet, savory chocolate cracker, that was weird, but it worked out well.
Yeah, it was super good.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some other goofy things we've
I don't
done.
have a good answer for you. I should.
Yeah.
Well, I told you they were going to say blue cheese and stout, so
Yeah.
You
we
did,
talked
you
about this
called it.
earlier, and I was
Kinda
like,
got
they're
that.
going to say that.
What beer fills you with nostalgia?
Sierra Nevada Pale Ale.
Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I'm from Northern California originally, as everybody else in Eugene, and that sort of is the home beer. That's one of the first craft breweries, and it's one of the first craft beers that I sort of really experienced when I was moving beyond my cheap light beer college phase, which I suppose Milwaukee's Best would probably also fill me with nostalgia in a different way.
Yeah, for me, I'm going to just say Rodenbach Grand Cru. This is a Flemish red ale. It wasn't my first craft beer. It wasn't my first imported beer, but it was one that just turned a light bulb on in my head that said, oh my goodness gracious. So Flanders red ales are kind of a little sweet, a little tart, a little like some vinegar sort of flavors, like balsamic vinegar flavors. And it was just like, what is this beer that I'm tasting? And I think back to that first time that I tried it, it blew me away because it's so much not like beer, similar to what you were thinking about when you tried our beers. And like, this isn't beer. And that's what I thought too. And maybe what led me down the path to making the beers that we make today.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would say that. I know this is about you, but
No, you.
my aha beer moment was I had New Belgium's La Folie, and that was the first kind of like sour beer that I had ever had that kind of opened my mind, and I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
And then I got really nerdy into Belgian beer, and that's when breweries were starting to make more beer like that.
Ivan, what is your nostalgia beer?
Corona. It just takes me back to I was born in Mexico. I get to go down there every couple of years, and when we're down there, you can order beer by the bucket. You don't even have to go to the store. It just gets delivered to you on a little moped. And that's just always the go-to.
And you're talking like a plastic Home Depot bucket.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
nice.
Filled with ice and just I think they can fit like 12 or 16 beers in there.
Yeah,
and
Colombia definitely had some of those vibes.
I'm going to Cabo San Lucas in 6 weeks. I will be drinking a lot of beers like that in a bucket.
Yeah,
I plan on getting a bucket.
Make sure you get the plastic bucket.
I will.
You got to get the whole experience.
Yes, I will.
What is the best advice you've ever been given?
Ooh, the rhino suit advice was pretty good.
I can't think of a whole lot that I've been given, but I'm the oldest person in our company, so sometimes people think of me as the dad. I have 2 kids who are in college, and so sometimes I think about the advice I give people, and what I would give people who are thinking about a business is you can do whatever you want in the world. Just whatever you can dream, you can do. And so I have 2 degrees in education, but I was only a teacher for 6 years, and I've been a brewer for 23 years. And it's just because I fell into this, I wanted to do it and I wanted to try it. But if I had said, I got these degrees in this, maybe I should do this. And I know, Brandon, you can speak to that too. Your education didn't take you down your life path. And I think everyone gets into a lane, and sometimes you feel like you can't get out of that lane. So my advice to people, and what I'd like to give to people is whatever you want to do, just go for it. If you have dreams and goals, don't let anything stop you.
I don't have anything that impactful, but I think it's super important just to have more sort of face-to-face interactions with people. I think much of the toxicity that we have in today's culture is because people are not interacting face-to-face, screaming at each other without hearing each other. I think when you actually hang out and have these conversations, everybody gets along pretty well.
What is a book or a podcast that you are currently listening to or have read or listened to in the past?
I listen to a lot of sports podcasts that aren't very influential, but they're entertaining to me. But I am starting to read a book called Critical Conversations, and it's about I can't remember the author of the book, but I'm about halfway through it, and it's about having those conversations, whether it be a workmate or whether it be a partner at home or something like that, how to have the right conversation so that we don't have the toxicity that we have in our world, and you can get along with others. And it's pretty neat book.
I don't listen to a ton of podcasts, but I really like Tim Ferriss's podcast if his guest is good. So if you kind of like hearing interesting people's stories and you kind of scan through, and he does a good job of not just like summarizing their history that everybody knows already. He like dives into some random deep stuff. So if you like that and you scroll through his list and you're like, that guy sounds interesting, like I think he does a pretty good interview.
All right, so this is a question I love asking everybody because everyone has a different answer and always has something personal about it. What is a hidden gem in Eugene that you would recommend to somebody who had just moved here, who is looking for something different, out of the ordinary, but something that you feel is very special? And you can't say Alesong.
Well, I think Alesong is obvious.
That would be answer number one, but we can't use that.
I think, and I think for me, and it's funny because it's right there. It sounds like Alesong a little bit. No, Antiquum Farm is a winery that is just northwest, kind of towards Junction City. That I think has awesome wine, obviously, but what makes it so cool is it's just like an incredible farm, and their whole process is kind of this cohesive process. It's called grazing-based viticulture. And so they actually have different farm animals. I'm probably butchering my description of it, but different times of the year where the different animals do different things in the vineyard. And it's kind of this holistic, it's just like a super cool process, the way they run their farm without kind of the modern agriculture spin that we see everything else. But it's just like a really cool property. Like the whole way they approach their business is awesome. So I think if you get a chance to go to Antiquum, and I think they're open sort of irregularly, you got to kind of check on that. But if you get a chance to go to Antiquum, it's really worth it.
Yeah, and their wine is delicious.
And the wine's delicious.
Yeah, I think they have 2 open houses a year, and then you got to be a member to join. For me, I've got a couple. I hope it's okay, but I'll do it fast. There's a couple restaurants on my list. One is Akira, which is just on the edge of downtown. They are so unique. They're in a house. They don't even really have a sign outside that you'd say, oh, there's Akira. I just drove by. But Taro, the owner, it makes the best sushi in town. He's not there day to day, but you would go and have the chef's tasting menu of his sushi. It was just so good. But now you can go upstairs. They make creative cocktails with a little bit of an Asian flair on many of their dishes. Akira is awesome, and I need to go there more often. I'm going to give you one outside of town. It's called Dueling Spoons. It's not so much a hidden gem to some people who like to dine out, but it's about a 20 to 25 to 30-minute drive in Fall Creek. This little restaurant that's been open for about a year, and they do fine dining. The chef is the owner, and he makes all the food in the kitchen, and his family, his wife, and his kids do all the serving. I just celebrated my 26th anniversary there last night, and it was a wonderful meal. If you're looking for a special occasion, they sang to 2 people having their birthdays. They sang to us having our anniversary.
How does the anniversary song go?
Happy anniversary to you. It was great.
All right,
And I'm going to give you a third one because I'm just hogging the mic right here. I said I like to camp when I'm not at work. Salmon Creek Falls is a place just outside of Oak Ridge. It's 4 miles east of Oak Ridge. There is no cell service there, so you can have your phone off. It's great.
Ooh, awesome.
But you can ride your bike on a trail back into Oak Ridge and drink at Three-Legged Crane or visit any other businesses in Oak Ridge. And it's right along Salmon Creek, and you can listen to the water just rushing by you while you're camping there. There's only about 12 sites, and it's first come, first serve, so you kind of have to be early and hope to luck on a site. But if you're looking to camp and not get too far into the wilderness, Salmon Creek Falls.
Salmon Creek Falls.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Check it out. Sounds
Yeah, you can
awesome.
even just park there with your bike and just jump on the trail and bring your tent with you and say, oh, there's an open site. Camp there. It's great. Love it.
Do you have a message for the community, for everyone that lives in Eugene, something that they should, whether it's a call to action or something to ponder or any words to leave with our listeners?
I think for me, as it pertains to Alesong, is, I had the goofy words of just do whatever you want to do. And if you can dream it, you can do it. But really, sometimes we just need to slow down. Alesong's about sort of, you could say we're in the slow food movement because it takes 18 months for our beer to go from production to being ready to sell. And so sometimes it's better just to turn off your phone. We used to not have good cell service out there.
I remember.
In the country. They've put a tower in recently, so we do have that. But sometimes it's better just to turn off your phone, take a look eye to eye with someone and have a conversation and just kind of slow down and get out of the rat race that we're living in. And so often we don't have an opportunity to do that because traffic's getting more, political races are heating up as we head towards November. How about just drive out to Alesong with a friend and have a conversation over a burger and a beer you've never had or a glass of wine that you've never had and enjoy someone's conversation. I think it's going to improve your life and improve our world. Right?
Yeah, I think, and this is also a little bit self-serving, but I think one of the things that differentiates Eugene from a lot of smaller cities is that we do have a pretty vibrant local scene of, bars, restaurants, businesses. And I think that really makes Eugene a unique and special place. But you do see a lot of these kind of local places closing, and I know we're all guilty of shopping at Amazon now and again, and we're all guilty of, big box stores, whatever. But I think if you value something in your community, whether it's a restaurant or, a really cool little bookstore, you need to shop there. You can't just expect that it will always be there for when you want to show somebody how cool your little town is if you don't spend your money there. And we see, certainly in the beer industry, people closing, and it's there's a lot of people that are like, oh man, that's such a bummer that Anchor Steam, for example, closed because it was such a cool historic place. But then you say, when was the last time you bought an Anchor Steam beer? And they're like, oh, it's been 10 years. And you're like, well, so do you really care?
Yeah, we take things for granted for sure.
I think Eugene has a super cool, vibrant scene of local businesses. And I think, if we want it to stay that way, you got to put your money where your mouth is.
Absolutely.
It's a great message. Yeah, absolutely.
That was awesome.
Well, thank you guys for being here today. This was awesome. The beer was awesome, obviously, but no, this conversation was fantastic. I think it really opens not only our eyes, but everyone else's eyes in the community to what's out there, and that it's about experiences.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thanks for keeping these on. I look forward to listening to them every week and hearing different perspectives. It's really easy to kind of get in your lane in the community and forget how much else is out there. So this is fun. Right on.
All right.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Wow. What a great interview, huh?
It really was.
Dude, these guys were a blast. They were very knowledgeable. I absolutely loved their operation. I can't say that I've ever heard of anybody making beer like them.
It is pretty unique. So yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you were talking about, how it's not unheard of, but definitely unique.
Yeah, it's unique. I mean, when people think of beer, they have their own, preconceived notions, right?
Absolutely.
The question about what's a nostalgic beer for you? And you said Corona, right?
Yeah.
Corona's on every shelf in the world, right? But for somebody else, it could be beer for me is Coors Light, right? Fishing.
Absolutely.
Or it could be something where it's it's IPAs that I get in town, right? Where I go out and I have, a couple beers with the buddies, right?
Yeah.
So everyone has their story behind it, right? And I think that is what the interesting part about their story is, that what they have is so unique.
One of the other things that really excited me about them is finding out about their location out in the country.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely, especially now that the summer and everything is here, it'd be a perfect spot to go out and just enjoy an evening. You've been there before. You used to work there.
Yes,
you started the place.
Yes, not only have I been there, yes,
I think you undersold it, man. Going into this, you didn't tell me all of these things, and these guys are like, well, why don't we just have Brandon speak? I was like...
Yeah, no, I suppose what people don't know is that I was the first employee that was ever hired for Alesong, and that this was back in 2017, and the year I moved here, actually. And they hadn't even fully opened the tasting room out in the country next to King and State yet. But when I moved here, I was I was still in the beer industry when I was in Nebraska, and when I moved out here, I was like, well, I want to get plugged into the beer industry somehow, and I want to find out how to, what's happening. And so I had heard about a tasting event that they had. They were doing like a food and beer tasting at their production brewery at the time. So it wasn't really like a tasting room. It was just kind of like a warehouse, kind of in an industrial part of town. And they had rolled up the garage doors and said, okay, we're going to pour some beers and have some tasting bites. And I went there, tried their product, and I was like, holy moly. This is as somebody who worked in the beer industry, I was like, this brewery is not only very new, but oh my gosh, they're going to go places, no question, because this is amazing. And so I was like, they're on my radar. I'm going to follow everything they do and see what they're up to. And while I was driving out to Y Pass, which was it's a mountain bike trail that's actually out towards Alesong's location in the country, I saw that they had a building that was under construction, and I was like, oh, interesting. So they're building a tasting room or something like that. And sure enough, like they found or they had a posting that they were looking for somebody to be their tasting room manager. And I was like, well, I have a background in that. And I already love their product. It's amazing. I remember even actually the first 2 beers I bought from them, one of them was called Tangled Up in Blueberry. And it was a beer that was barrel aged and made with blueberries. And the second one was called Cherry Parliament. Cherries, obviously. But I mean, they were amazing. And so I was like, well, I'm going to apply for this job, and applied for the job, had interview. Actually, we had like 3 or 4 rounds of interviews that I went through, which was actually funny. But I got to learn that there was 3 owners. I met, Matt and Doug, and I don't know. We all just like hit it off, and it just worked out. And then in 2017, we opened up the tasting room that summer.
Wow.
And yes, we helped, and we laid some of the gravel. We put in some of the posts. We did a lot of the heavy lifting there. They did too. I think that's one of the unusual things is that, a lot of people think that people that own something didn't put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into it.
Absolutely.
But these guys did, man. I was there. I saw them cut themselves. I saw them sweat. May have even saw them cry. But anyways, having built some of the experience out there, I can say 100% this is a place that this would be my hidden gem.
Really?
That I would recommend to anybody because there's nothing else like it. Nothing else like it.
Well, I'm super excited because literally me and Tracy, my wife, have been looking for a place like this.
Yeah.
And, when we were talking before the interview, and you were like, yeah, outside seating and games and just family friendly. And it looks like a postcard. I'm just like, man, this is literally something that we've been looking for. So I'm excited to go out there and check it out. And that wasn't even like ad placement or promo or anything like that. No. This is just... Yeah, it's neat to know.
Yeah, well, you're going to have fun out there. I mean, not only are you going to have this beautiful experience, enjoying the food and the beverages and all of that. And there's bocce ball out there. There's cornhole. There's other games out there. It's the atmosphere.
Yeah.
That really drives it. And
the experience.
The whole episode was about experiences, right?
Absolutely.
And elevating them. And I feel like that's exactly what you get out there.
I love that. Well, thank you for joining us, folks. That's all we have for today. If you get a chance, definitely go out and check out Alesong Brewing and Blending out on, what is it, Country Road? No.
It's off of Territorial
it's
Highway.
In the country.
Off Territorial Highway next to King Estate.
Next to King Estate. So thank you for joining. We'll see you all on the next one.
This episode of the Eugene Morning Hustle podcast was brought to you by the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce and sponsored by Ivan Torres of Business Block Studios and Brandon Miller Voiceover. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel where you get your podcasts and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn to stay in the know. If you have any questions, topics, or guests you'd like us to dive into, send us a voice message on the Eugene Chamber Instagram page, and we'll feature you and your question on a future episode. Or shoot us an email at podcast@eugenechamber.com. Till next time, Eugene.